Okay, well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on mediating to prevent homelessness, exploring new models. My name is Brennan Fraser, and I am the membership coordinator for NAPCOM and will be your moderator today. Before we get started, here is some basic information about how you can effectively participate in today's webinar. While the presenter is speaking, I will have everyone else muted to ensure the best audio quality, but we still encourage questions and comments throughout the webinar, and there's two ways that you can do that. If you would like to verbally ask your question or make a comment, you can raise your hand using the raise hand icon on the control panel, and I will then turn on your audio and call on you so you can ask that question. Or you can use the chat feature located in the bottom of the control panel to send your question to the group, and then we'll read that aloud for you at a good time. And now I would like to briefly introduce our speaker. For over 30 years, Peter Shapiro has been assisting tenants, landlords, and property managers to resolve their issues over eviction while making homelessness prevention and tenancy preservation a priority goal. A graduate of MIT's master's program in city planning, Peter went on to found and direct the housing services program at Just the Start Corporation, a nonprofit community development corporation in Cambridge, Massachusetts. From 1990 to 2015, Peter and his team provided mediation, counseling, legal education, and training for landlords and tenants across the Metro Boston and statewide area. His innovative models and techniques, using primarily homelessness prevention public funds, led to the successful resolution of thousands of eviction disputes that maximize tenancy preservation while also stabilizing landlords, particularly those at risk. A landlord himself since 1990, Peter has been developing, testing, and applying ideas from his own practice and has written a book entitled The Good Landlord, A Guide to Making a Profit While Making a Difference. Peter currently works for the City of Boston Office of Housing Stability as a landlord counselor and mediator. He also works for Mass Landlords, a statewide association of small property owners. With that being said, it's my pleasure to pass this off to Peter.
Thank you so much. I don't know how to, that's quite a nice statement you made about me. Thank you very much. My name is Peter, and I'm really happy to be here, and we have a nice hour to spend. I am going to run you through slides, and I'm expecting to hear your questions. I would love to learn from you as well and have a great session here. So I'm going to start. Everybody is seeing my PowerPoint moving forward? Yes, Brennan?
Yes, we can, although if you would like to, you could put it into full screen mode or presentation mode. That's the button immediately to the left of the Zoom slide bar on the bottom right of the screen.
Drawing this one here? No.
It's you see the 67% down on the bottom right?
Oh yeah. Of course.
If you go to the left, it looks kind of like an overhead projector pull down thing, and that should put you in. There's one button right there. You go, right there.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to start with a few 4 questions, and I will ask you, and Brennan is going to tabulate. First question, just learn about you all. Are you an executive director or paid staff for a mediation program? Are you, Brennan?
Yep, so the question is up and running, and then we'll give you about 30 seconds or so, and then we'll display the results for everyone.
Okay.
Okay, it looks like the votes have stabilized, so I'm going to go ahead and share those with the group. So it looks like we're at 62% answered yes to the question and 38% answered no.
Great. Thank you. Okay, secondly, of those who run mediation programs, do you use the volunteer mediation model?
Okay, it looks like the votes have stabilized, so let me close and share that. So we have 94% answering yes to that and 6% answering no.
Great, thank you. Okay, and are you a volunteer mediator yourself?
Okay, and for that one, we have 59% answering yes and 41% answering no.
Okay, and lastly, how many of you who work in the mediation programs include landlord, tenant, condo, or other forms of housing mediation in your organizations?
Okay, so for this one, we have 91% answering yes and 9% answering no.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Very, very helpful, and glad to know more about you and look forward to learning more. Okay. I ask those questions because I've been a volunteer mediator with programs in and around the Boston area, but primarily my work as a mediator has been by getting funding to have a small team of paid mediators doing both pretrial and court-based mediation. We're going to talk about how, mostly about how this model that I've developed may work, but obviously it fits into a larger context where volunteer mediation obviously does enormous work in here in Boston and elsewhere. Okay, so we're going to move forward. This is my outline for today's presentation. We're going to talk about I'm going to introduce myself, and I'm going to spend a few minutes because particularly for the work I've done, it may be relevant as far as potential funding for mediation and how we've sort of evolved different models to address the unique circumstances between tenants and landlords. So introduce the work I've done and how the program has worked that I ran for 20 years. That's the first thing. The second is the big picture, landlords and tenants and their perspectives with their needs to both live in housing and make a living providing housing. So that's the second. The third is we're going to talk about models. First with some assumptions that I have worked with, and then various models that my colleagues and I have developed here in the Boston area, where it's about 18 degrees today. And the last piece I'll just touch on, just the concept of teaching approaches for landlords. They're very relevant to tenants as well, for how to do well by doing good and sort of stable management practices. The fourth piece, which really we can touch on as much as we have time for, but it's a big piece, but I would really just introduce it, is just how we fund. My program has funded homelessness prevention mediation work. Okay, so I'm going to move forward. You see, that's an old picture of a landlord kind of pushing tenants either to pay or scram, is my assumption here. Okay, so this is, so my history quickly, graduate degree, I've done volunteer and paid mediation in eviction and small claims courts. I've also done family divorce and adoption, but that's a minor part of the work I've done. So now this is a program I ran for 20 years. I am not working currently with it, but I am very closely associated, and program is doing similar work to what I was doing when I was there as the director. So it's a community development corporation in Cambridge. The program I ran was called Mediation for Results. Basically $500,000 to $800,000 per year, different contracts to provide mediation, preventing homelessness, getting mostly families, sometimes individuals, out of homeless shelter back into housing and helping to stabilize them. And we did work on low, moderate income condo ownership, subsidized purchase and management of units throughout the city of Cambridge and Boston wide. So leadership, training, mediation, technical assistance. Okay, so I probably will come back to this slide at the end, but I'm just going to introduce, I think I will, time permitting. Mediation for Results. we received funding from these sources, CDBG, Community Development Block Grant. Maybe all of you know these these funding sources, or if you don't, they have been going for years, since the late 60s, some of them. Community Development Block Grant is federal money through HUD. Homelessness Prevention Rapid Rehousing, HPRP, was the Obama stimulus money in 2009 through HUD to both prevent evictions and move people quickly out of housing. So it's a source we used for about 5 years. And then HUD, Housing and Urban Development Continuum of Care, or I'll say COC ahead. It's a very particular, maybe some of you are also aware in your states, a mechanism for money to flow through a coordinated entry program, and one lead agency administering the process and different individual programs getting money to work in coordination with this continuum of care that's established in your state. So again, quick introduction to that. So federal money, state money, in Massachusetts, the AG provides mediation for mostly court-based business and housing, so small claims, and we call it here summary process or eviction mediation. So we were funded through the Consumer Mediation Program. Now the EA, Emergency Assistance Family Shelter, is particular to Massachusetts, where there's an entitlement for shelter. So eligible families who are homeless will be placed in housing and then placed in emergency shelter and then help to get into permanent housing. So we help them manage themselves in emergency shelter and help them get out of shelter into housing. So that was a funding source for us. Various city grants that we receive, private money, Bar Foundation, United Way, people make charitable contributions. And we did some fee-for-service work, which perhaps many of you also do, in both mediation and counseling services. Okay, I hope I'm not going too fast. If I am, Brendan, you'll hear from them, right? Okay, we're going on. Okay, so outcomes. This is approximate number of cases per year. 600 cases resolved, 250 day of court mediations, 350 pre-trial. And of that 600, we measured 400 of those cases per year to be preventions. I'll say more about that later. And as part of this program, $200,000 of rental assistance we were distributing in between $1,000 and $8,000 increments provided through the different federal and state sources to prevent eviction, prevent homelessness. And when I say prevent eviction, let me also add, preventing homelessness is both preserving tenancies where tenants are, and successfully transitioning individuals and families to new affordable housing. So if we can win 9 months from the landlord, and during which time the tenant, either increases their income or gets a subsidy or gets some move-in money, and we can, the search programs that we work with can help that family or individual move on successfully. We count that as a prevention because they can stay or go. The question is stabilizing their housing. Okay, so outcomes. So as I said, I did this work for years. I stay very close to it. From my previous job, I left. I had this book and training, and I decided to be on my own. But I've got a couple jobs, consulting jobs. One is with a city or state housing neighborhood development or housing stability program. Our city Department of Neighborhood Development, Office of Housing Stability, they hired me to receive tenant and landlord referrals to counsel one, or if I work with both, we call it mediation. Most of the work is pre-trial, although I do go through, most of the cases have court procedures accompanying my work, and I do sometimes go to Boston Housing Court. There's a mediation program in the court. I often will sit in through the mediation processes, but much of the work is pre-trial, and we get agreements often before day of court. I'll say more about that later. So that's City of Boston. Mass Landlords is a statewide association who really wants to counsel, stabilize housing. They care about homelessness and educating particularly small owners. So I work with them in various policy work, program initiatives around freeing up city-owned land to get owners to buy, and work with service providers to house homeless individuals, programs like that. So I've been working with Mass Landlords now and the city for about a year and a half, various things with Mass Landlords. I also still work as a mediator with my previous job, the Just a Start organization. I'm paid by them $40 an hour. And I'm doing my own individual work, educating on a video. I'm doing a video education program. I've got a video, one 15-minute video already. I want to do an online training for stabilizing housing by helping owners deal with tough tenancies. Okay, so this is a book, spent many years sweating, and I think it's helpful because it talks about the culture between tenants and landlords and strengthening relationships, avoiding escalation of disputes, dealing responsibly with eviction. I can say more about this later. It's a book, it's on Amazon that you can see. Okay, so now we're going on to the tenant and landlord context. By the way, are there questions at this point, Brennan? Give people a chance.
I am not seeing any questions at the moment, but if anything does come up, again, please. You can either chat box to the bottom or the raise hand icon to the left of your control panel.
Okay, great. Okay. Okay, why is housing so important? Sure, we're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We see at the bottom, warmth, rest. Next to that is security and safety. Really, housing, not news to any of us, is a fairly essential basic human need. Nothing more to say about that. It's just right out there as critical. Okay, we know when people have decent, affordable housing, they are not on the streets. They have kitchens and working showers. They can go to school. They could keep a job going because they get mail sent to them. They can network, build community, go to church, join clubs. Everything that we know, not news to us, is the underlying, requirements of life that housing allows us to meet. Okay, so and again, this is sort of setting the context. What makes housing, tenant-landlord life so difficult? I see a question. We'd love your thoughts on mediating between neighborhoods. I missed that question. Did you catch it, Brennan?
Yes, so this was from Larry, and he says he would love your thoughts on mediating between neighborhoods and those proposing housing for the formerly homeless. Hold up it. We have such a conflict where he lives in South Florida, and he thinks this is an ongoing challenge elsewhere as well.
You're talking about helping neighborhoods accept new housing programs cited in, where you're going to have multiple individuals living together. You may have to get a variance, or is that the question?
Yes, I think it was between neighborhoods and those proposing housing for the formerly homeless. So it sounds like housing coming up in neighborhoods where it formerly did not exist. Yes,
I mean, I haven't worked a lot on overcoming neighborhood opposition. I used to facilitate meetings on that, and I right now working on some individual initiatives. I'd like to put that question aside though, and I have some thoughts, but if that's okay, it's a very, very useful question. I'm going to move forward. Okay, thank you for that. But I will. Let's see if we can come back to that. Okay, so why is the landlord-tenant relationship so difficult? We know the market, not news. In Boston, there is gentrification even in the most low-income neighborhoods these days, although it's in pockets. So we know the market is critical for why there is tension between tenants and landlords. Okay, and this is the tenant perspective. If you see the cartoon, it's hopefully, we know in particular Massachusetts, around the country, respectfully, tenants have consumer rights to, before they get kicked out, that they have adequate housing and they, all the, not to dwell, but warranty of habitability and all the claims that tenants may exercise and before landlords have the right to evict. Tenant laws in Massachusetts are quite strict. Okay, tenants use these rights. Take a moment to read the cartoon. It may make you laugh. It's not funny here. In the middle of these conflicts, you probably all know your own experience. Until landlord has met all his or her habitability requirements and not accessing illegally and managing security deposit correctly, all of their responsibilities, until then, tenant may not be forced out of a house for cause, or even not for cause. Okay. Now, that's supposed to be a scary landlord in that picture. Making a profit for landlords can be difficult. Now, that may sound unusual. We know how much the market has changed and many people making lots of money. I did a project, a research program with the city where we looked at the low-income owners and their struggles to get capital into their buildings and keep tenants paying rent, and they do all these positive things to stabilize neighborhoods. That's the good side. When owners are struggling, they may do illegal activities. They demand large rent increases, avoid repairs, enter without permission, discriminate. So we have that slumlord side of landlording. Even when landlords are trying to do the right thing with respect to tenant rights, and I know in the city of Boston, and I'm sure across the country, many landlords can't collect their rent, can't properly maintain because they can't get a loan. They struggle to get in and out of the unit to do the repairs. Rodent and infestation and all of that, keeping the peace. So we have many ends for owners struggles if they are mistreating tenants or they're not able to keep the buildings going for different reasons. So we're now sliding into the landlord perspective here. So I say small landlords do great work, and often for some, they need our help. And that's a market that I got to know I know very well. I say in this picture, big money versus happy, because after 30 years, day after day, hearing how owners manage difficult tenancies when they can help somebody be stable in housing and make a living doing it, they feel good about what they do. Happy lane. So we'll go back to that. So it's amazingly valuable contribution to our cities that owners provide when housing works. I'm not going to dwell on this either. This is just a simple typology, snapshot of landlords, and we're going to start, if you all can see it, hopefully. Top left, developer converters, those are the flippers and the gentrifiers, respectfully. They see their role as turning properties over to make it upgrade the standards. I say respectfully, I have my own, we all have our own views on how this is operating in our cities. It's a big factor. So the developers and condo converters, et cetera, flippers. Bottom left, old-time slumlords, and we have many in our city here, Boston and elsewhere. Don't fix, jack up the rents, do everything they can to get the most amount of a building, milking it till they abandon it often. I heard the question, I'm sorry, the PowerPoint will be emailed and put on the website, so please not to worry about taking notes. I wish I'd said that earlier. everything on this PowerPoint will be available to everybody after the training. Okay, so that's the bottom left. Top right, this is your large-scale owners. Many are just market rate. Some are mixed income using various public sources, Section 8, all the in-place subsidized programs. They work carefully to manage. They have resident services often. They got long-term interests, so the long-term residential mixed income, which I have worked with over the years. The primary people who have really valued my work has been the small owners, up to 9 units typically. They may owner occupy, or they may own a few buildings and live in the neighborhood. I'm going to say more about them in a second. So I'm going to go past this slide. It's more detailed about these different types of owners, but it will be available to you. So I'm going to move forward. Okay, so here's just some quick statistics. Boston, over 46% of the units in the city of Boston are in buildings that are up to 6 units. So just to say, half of our housing stock, and it is pretty consistent across the country in urban areas, is in small buildings. In Boston, I get the statistics. So here's the stat for the US. More than half of all rentals. And again, I know there's a lot of data here, and it's for your review afterwards. I really want to get to the meat of our training. I just want to, this is the context. Okay. So more than half the rentals across the country are in either singles or 2 to 4. Actually, up to 5 to 9 units, you have about 50%. So it's just mirroring the city of Boston data with the US data that, we think that it's large buildings. It's actually mostly small buildings owned by individuals. They may be LLCs, but you don't have corporate entities primarily owning these small buildings. Of course, with the foreclosure crisis in the late 2006 to 2008, these national companies bought up a lot of these small buildings and new portfolio for them. But predominantly, it is still a small owner business owning and managing these small buildings. Okay, so that's the data to support that. Excuse me 1 second. Okay, so, and this is borne by research that small owners are typically long-term. They want to live in their buildings, pass it on to their heirs. Many of them backed into the properties as carpenters and plumbers, knowing how to fix, and an essential skill if you're a small property owner. So most are long-term. And often because of the business arrangement between small owners and tenants, rents happen to be more affordable. Most of them don't have professional help. Managers, accountants, resident services, lawyers, etc. They do their own work often to keep their maintenance expenses down. And they also often are more flexible when tenants are not paying the rent. Now, of course, many of them push hard to kick tenants out and want higher rents, want to fix up their buildings. I'm not trying to glorify the small owner fully. There's a large component who actually have the informal housing sector have done enormously successful affordable housing work, whether or not with Section 8 or other subsidies, to keep low, moderate income people stable in their neighborhoods. Okay, so I mentioned before, that for many of them, when housing works, particularly for low, moderate income people, they feel good about their work. And this is just another slide you can look at your leisure. And this is from my years. I've really, since the late 80s, I've primarily worked on housing disputes, and I got very interested in the small owner as a force for good in some cases. And this is some, my learning about how they understand themselves providing housing. They feel better. They feel meaningful about helping people. They learn. They mentor. They appreciate being recognized when the tenant about to be evicted was prevented because they stretched the payments out, or they got that tenant help, or whatever they did to keep that tenant in their housing. So they actually, feel like this is meaningful work. Okay, so now we're going to turn towards new models of how to work with tenant-landlord conflict. Okay, so these are assumptions that I bring to the work. It may not be everybody's assumptions, and they may be provocative. Let's see if we want to spend more time talking or not. I see mediation as, this is not news. We're all mediators here. In your fields, you've worked for years on this. Mediation can and should serve public interest objectives, whether on divorce and adoption, the best interests of the children, on environmental work and homelessness work. The classic line a mediator on an environmental case, comes up with is some party says, "Hey, I thought you were here to help protect the environment." And the mediator says, "No, I'm here to resolve a conflict." This is obviously a big subject, and we could spend a lot of time discussing, but I just want to, it's the way I've worked here in Massachusetts, and particularly from the funding that we've gotten, we can mediate and prevent homelessness. I'll just, for the moment, leave it there. Big subject. Stabilizing properties for small owners can often stabilize housing for tenants at risk. That I've been speaking about that, and it really bears out from years of working with, particularly with the small owners renting to people at risk. Third, fit the form to the fuss. Mediators, this is a question of models. And different approaches may often work better or differently based on the situations of the parties. And I'll talk a lot more about that in a few minutes. Okay, mediating to prevent homelessness, I believe, does not necessarily compromise your neutrality. And again, I'm going to go into this in depth right now. Okay, in a second. Okay, so this is another huge topic. A lot of we're all experts here. I just want to touch on it. And this is sort of informing me as a administrator of programs and a mediator. And just to set the context, people have mixed feelings about mediation. As we know, they don't think that, they need neutrals. People are suspicious of us. They don't think we really are neutral. They really are looking for advocacy, power, resources. And mediators, our interests aren't necessarily in sync with our clients. We know that lawyers and public officials and human resource staff often have different agendas. The HR person may be wanting to fire the client, the employee. Advocates want to make a point to to the legislature. We also have an agenda as mediators. So anyway, this is also large fodder for discussion. I'm aware of that. Okay, so what got me thinking about this, I worked for 5 years with rent control disputes. Very strong regulatory framework, bad relationships. From my experience, the volunteer mediator model did not fit. We couldn't get people to the table on a Tuesday night or Wednesday night, but I was the landlord counselor and a tenant counselor. We resolved a lot of disputes. Just one-on-one. So anyway, Brendan, you have somebody in my clock. Are we at 11:33 right now? Hello? Hello? Can anybody hear me? Oh, we are. Okay, I'm sorry. Somebody said yes, so thank you, Tina. I was screaming. I apologize. Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving quickly here. So alternative models. We're communicating better, but we are not out of the woods. These are cartoons I got from Shutterstock. So, okay, so this is the model. Now, we know there are many variations. Many of you do this, may have many other models than this. This is a simple model in Massachusetts where you go through the coordinator schedules, parties show up on an evening, they may have one shot with the mediator may not have any follow-up contact with the parties. I'm not going to dwell, it's a classic, and it is extremely successful for many of our cases for all the reasons that you all know. Okay, that is a traditional model. The parties, get help to show up on a Tuesday night or whatever and do a session, and then the follow-up, either successful or referral or other. Okay, this is a model, the generic model, where the mediator, we don't have coordinators. My small team, when I worked with 4 of us, each of us has other activities, but each of us had a caseload. So the mediator gets the case, does the intake, and controls the process, pre-trial, court-based, pre-trial, trial day, post. They bring the court procedure in. They bring the services that the tenant may need in. They access homelessness resources, if it's preventing eviction with dollars, if it's following along with a subsidy the tenant's about to get. They bring the legal context in. If, alongside the court process, if the tenant's getting some new monies to help, the landlord may agree to a continuance that the parties move forward and, 2 weeks later may or may not have to appear. If tenant, has services and makes some progress on issues that the landlord is struggling with, then that another reason for a continuance. But most simply in this model, the mediator receives the case, whether or not by phone or in person, most often not in person pre-trial, and starting before court, a mediator may be in court with the parties and then may follow up with the parties after the mediation. Okay, because of time, I'm moving quickly so we can get through all of this. Okay, so much of that work we have done as through the phone. So, and we found that it helps. Parties will talk to us on the phone, but we can't get them to show up an in-person mediation. By getting parties earlier, particularly both parties, particularly the landlords, we can use legal assistance more judiciously so that the landlords stick with us. They don't just say, thank you, I want a lawyer instead. They may use a lawyer themselves and stay with us. We may get some legal advice. We get neutral legal opinions, but we keep the parties staying with us, keeping the legal fees down, often for the landlord, which translated into more flexible resolutions, more money to, give tenants some break on the rent, or, stretch out payment plans because landlords' upfront costs are lower. So this phone mediation model is something now to this day, I'm doing this all day for the city of Boston, talking to both sides and keeping the parties focused on me as the mediator, moving them through their procedure. Okay, so those, the generic model I presented, which is right here, and then this phone mediation is a piece of that model. And then this is another piece. We have, for day of court eviction mediation, worked where during the mediation, we have a cell phone connection to a homelessness prevention resource person to whom we can call and say, hey, I've got Mary, she didn't apply for rental assistance for families in transition. It's RAFT, is a state money, $4,000 piece of money to help eligible tenants to prevent eviction. During the court mediation, on the phone, Mary talks to the program, tentatively gets qualified. Obviously, all the follow-up eligibility is required. And we do that kind of activity during the mediation to try to either get agreements to stabilize or get continuance pending confirmation of resources. So this is a model that we have used to try to integrate homelessness prevention. Now, bells are ringing here about why, can you do this? And are you being an advocate? And maybe we can talk about all of that. Rarely were we told by landlords that we were too tenant oriented. If you meet in tenant, landlord interests, we most of the time kept the parties at the table, both of them enough satisfied to, sign away, sign their agreements, going through the enforceable agreements entered into the court record, etc. So that is another piece. Okay. And again, we can come back to each of these, and because I'm moving quickly enough that we'll have some time, I really want to hear your thoughts on any of this. So this is a model, landlord support groups that I used for years through a nonprofit that administers subsidies. We have housing authorities across the country that administer Section 8s, and in Massachusetts, there's state equivalent programs, mass rental voucher programs, state subsidies, 5,000 owners getting subsidies through a nonprofit. They paid us monthly to sit down with 5 to 25 owners to offer them help. Listening to each other was an enormously helpful form of support to these owners. Hearing each other's experiences, being recognized for the struggles they're going through, getting them legal information, counseling them, helping them decide next steps, serving a notice, not necessarily to evict, but to push the tenant in this case, to resolve violations of the tenancy, to get back in compliance. We want to keep tenants in there, but if owners are losing their shirt, if you will, to take action, and that's often a big, and referral. So I'm realizing as I'm talking about all this that it may sound more landlord oriented, and I have more so focused on landlords. Now I spend a lot of time with tenant counseling and landlord counseling. There is an enormous equivalent for tenants already in the system. Many of you probably have a lot of contact with legal services organizations, tenant rights, there's out of advocacy. We are not discounting that tenants deeply need to know their rights and to advocate, and to, any agreement that we reach, we want to make sure is well informed by the law. So this whole presentation could be from the tenant perspective. It's really, I'm giving you more landlord information, but we're mediating and we're trying to do everything we can to give the landlord reason to not, kick the bum out, to not evict unless absolutely necessary, to do what they can. Okay, so now a few slides here, and I have a bunch of slides, but I don't want to make this the thrust. It's been my work because of my work, my writing and training and some video work I want to do now, to teach landlords, particularly the many who don't have professional help, can't afford it, to learn how to manage to avoid, breakdowns in tenancies, and keep the rent flowing, keep the buildings fixed, be in position to evict if they need to, but not wanting to proceed with eviction unless absolutely necessary. So teach good landlording skills. And you can see here, the guy's not even a nice guy, and he's having a hard time avoiding calamity as a landlord. And again, a perspective that I've become very familiar with. So an education program for owners, and I am interested if in your communities there is a demand for this. I have resources and make them highly available, because there is a gap that most of the associations for owners don't fill, which is to do this education for the informal small owner sector. And this is a caption in my book, most books tell you how to invest and choose the right management company, but dealing with tenancy issues is the toughest. You can see how this cat is being a little bit tough, demanding on her master. Okay, and so I believe that when we teach owners how to, build good relationships, communicate effectively, prevent issues from escalating, and then deal responsibly with eviction, we are doing the right work to stabilize tenants at risk. This is not about making the landlord feel good. It's about giving landlords flexibility when tenants become at risk to work with the tenant and not have to just go to court. Okay, and this is a little piece again about strong working relationships. The benefits of a strong working relationship. My time here. Parties are, when we build trust, people feel comfortable, interactions strengthen, relationships, allows, owners need to protect themselves, tenants desperately need to protect themselves by, paper trail documentation. Both sides have to sort of show their good faith, behavior to, tenant has to show if a landlord's not fixing, so the tenant has a right to withhold. The landlord has to show good faith to ask for access to fix and not barge in unpermitted. And I'll say more about this in a second. Okay, so and this is a very quick thing. It's a piece that we teach here about making deposits in the relationship, and then you can get withdrawals. A landlord makes a concession when a tenant, tells the landlord the water was leaking and I went downstairs and, turned the knob off to prevent the leak from becoming a flood. Boy, oh boy, that is a deposit from the tenant side that should warrant a landlord giving a lot of recognition to that tenant. Landlords can make repairs before they need the tenant to fix it. Landlord can let the tenant in at 2 a.m. Things like that the landlord does helps build capacity when the heat freeze, the pipes freeze and the landlord can't fix the heating system for 2 days in the winter and you need some goodwill from the tenant. So we teach these kind of things. So this is part of this new series. I'm not needing to dwell on it, but it's about 5 basic skills, and there's, I'm finishing this book and with a video and downloadable exercises with these 5 principles. And this is something else. It's a little bit of a violent image of, if it's a Charlie Brown cartoon. This teaching owners to, 2-track means start an eviction a little early. Start an eviction 1 to 3 weeks after the non-payment, but be very open to negotiating. So we coach owners to not wait for 7 months, trying to get the person to follow up, being nice to them, and then turn from being overly nice to being overly mean. We try to do what we call 2-track, where we do firm and flexible. Get the legal process going, but delay it, continue it, stay open to negotiation, get maximum resources, do everything to preserve the tenancy, but not to go months and months until you start a court process. And it's just one example. And I have this good landlord approach to eviction. We teach this process for owners. Okay, so I am getting to the end of my, except for the funding question. If you notice, this is Moses asking for the commandments. I thought it was funny because we know how different the times were in the time of Moses. Okay, I know I have rambled for 48 minutes here, and I don't have any idea how relevant or what you think about this. If you have questions, I can talk about how the program that I've run and how the funding has worked, etc. But I'd like to open the floor now and just get any comments or questions. We had one already. Are there others as well?
Hi, Peter. My apologies if you got to this already. I had to step out for a second due to an issue in the office. But we had a question from Susan regarding defining pretrial work. Did you get to that already, or is that a new question?
No. Okay. Funding pre-trial work. Okay. Is that one? Okay. I can talk about that. Okay. So I'm going to look at this for a second, then I'm going to go back to a slide earlier. I mean, these are no-brainers. I know for those, all the programs have to get money, obviously. Following the money. In the case of housing, understanding the laws, the context, gaining support of the local organizations. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm just, bear with me for 1 second here. Okay, sorry, I apologize. Oops. Okay, here. Okay, thank you. Okay, so for example, in each of your states, look at the HUD, the HUD continuum of care. You have nonprofits. They may be called, do what they call permanent housing, and these are big terms, a lot of detail, won't go into it. Mobile homeless outreach, transitional housing, permanent housing, the housing first model. This is some introduction to the vernacular in the world of stabilizing homeless people, individuals and families, getting people out of, off the street into housing. Housing first model means you don't worry about their substance abuse or drug use or health concerns. You have to first put them in housing, and then hopefully they'll improve their lives. The research shows they will. It used to be different. It used to be unless you help their personal lives, housing won't help. Now, with the HUD Continuum of Care has Emergency Solutions Grant Program, which is the particular piece of a large grant process that we were able to get money from. We said to the housing providers, you can give out money to, so this ESG, Emergency Solutions Grant, is a prevention of eviction, which is a small piece. We did other pieces. We said to them, we can give out, the programs giving out the money didn't resolve the disputes. Let us give out that money, and during that time, we will make sure every other service and resource available to the tenants will be accessed. We'll help them to resolve the eviction cases, to stabilize both sides. So that funded our pre-trial work. We get referrals from associations, from property management companies, from agencies that administer Section 8s and the housing authorities, widely advertise that presentations to these agencies. You hear anything about an unstable tenancy, call us. And because we could administer the rental subsidy, that was the hook to get the money through the HUD Continuum of Care. If you want to, if I can hear from the person more questions, or I can say a couple more comments if I could.
Okay, great. And would you define that pretrial work as before any court filings are actually put into place, or is that before their first appearance in court?
Well, for example, different programs have different eligibility requirements. For some programs, we may get the case 10 days before the trial date because the case has been filed, docketed, and that's when we hear, and that's when a tenant may when we first have contact with both parties, and that's when a prevention resource is eligible for, they're eligible because they now have an eviction case docketed, and they are about to go to trial on eviction. So we do get cases prior to filing eviction. We will either with a lawyer or with our resources help owners start the eviction, serving the notices to terminate tenancies, even serving the summary processes, staying with the tenant to say, we know that we can help you to avoid eviction, but we need to get yourself moving forward with eviction in order to maximize the resources available. So, but the key for us to be able to do this work was using, the HUD continuum of care. I see another question. Here we have landlord-tenant tribunal with mediator at the door. They do. I didn't catch that. You can research through the HUD COC continuum of care. There's a network of organizations. There's a lead agency. They give a notice of funding availability, NOFAs, every approximately 18 months. And there are organizations that for whom mediation and administering rental assistance on the prevention side, it fits very, very well into a mediation model. But I would say to you that you see, this is the mediators that have succeeded in my program and perhaps in others around the country. I don't think this model is being used very well, are very well versed in the law. I mean, for better or worse, for 30 years, I've been studying these guides, and I'm not a lawyer, but I can do 95%, although I'm not representing owners. I can, if need be, I can help an owner so they have only minimal need for lawyers, and I use lawyers, and I have a network who provide volunteer help to me on, give me opinions and procedural advice, but the owners will work with us, and because we can do a lot of this. And we did have a fee-for-service landlord counseling program where we charge $60 to $80 to get these small owners to work with us pre-trial through the court process as needed, unbundling the legal services piece, so they may have a lawyer working with them, but they stay with us, or we get some legal advice that we give to them, and we counsel them to resolve a dispute, not to, whatever we can do to, meet both parties' objectives. Did that help? Any follow-up question on that?
And we'll wait for Susan to provide any follow-ups for that. We have a question from Catherine, and this one is somewhat lengthy, so bear with me as I read this through, but she's in Ontario, Canada, and they have a landlord-tenant tribunal with mediators at the door. They do last-minute 1-hour negotiations to try to address the presenting problem. In one part of Toronto, they were trying a pilot project to try early intervention mediation through offering it to the landlords at application. However, with the housing market favoring landlords and favoring vacancies where they can increase the rent significantly, they had no uptake. Furthermore, the tribunal mediators would not work with community mediation to extend the initial work they might do. They saw them as competition instead. How do they get around the type of thinking that is more beneficial to terminate rather than extending the tenancy?
Yeah, how do you get? Yes, okay. The pilot program, early intervention didn't work well. I'm hearing her say this was an at the door, which I assume is perhaps in the courtroom awaiting trial. I understand the question, and I'm very aware of all the reasons why landlords do not want to talk to you or me pre-trial. And a large percentage of them would never even call me. And then if I talk to another large number, they'll look at me askance and, within minutes, thank you, but, I don't need your help. There is a particular niche of owners for whom this, this kind of assistance has really succeeded. I have enormous caseload with the city of Boston right now. The market is a factor. If you have, enormous demand, zero vacancies, because of student populations or influx of young professionals, owners have a lot, and they just think if the person moves the next minute, another person at a higher rent will move in. Do they want to do what? Do they want to stabilize a tenant, particularly a vulnerable tenant? These are very, very legitimate questions, and it's a big subject. The conditions under which we've succeeded are that there are less well-capitalized owners whose rents are more reasonable. They're not going to suddenly get a high rent increase after they may fix. They don't have lawyers. They may have made mistakes as far as their paper trail. That the city has maybe cited them. There are many owners. They haven't managed the security deposit correctly. So the legal context is a reason for owners to work with us, because they may not fare well in court. So that is a piece. Many owners don't know that there's much more that can be done for tenants to meet their non-payment, or get 7 people down to 4 people because it's only units only available for 4, or put the tenants on notice if they don't, keep the noise down, or they're going to be evicted. We tell tenants all the reasons why they want to comply with the owner requests to avoid an eviction process where likely the owner can evict. The question is getting them early, and the question is which owners, and whether you have, I think we all know what our alternatives to negotiation, our BATNAs are, what leverage we have. And, here in Massachusetts, for many owners, we have a lot of leverage, and we talk up the law in a neutral way. We talk up the procedure. We do phone mediation with both sides to, keep their costs down, and bigger conversation, but we have succeeded in these areas. I can say more, but other questions, or is our time up?
I'm not seeing any questions at the moment, but if anyone does, you can use the chat bar or the raise hand icon to the left. Okay, so I'm not seeing any, or actually, Stephen is asking if you can see the 2-track information again.
Sure. I'm sorry with this. I have to go slowly here. I apologize. Okay, so 2-track here. Can you see? Is it too small to see?
It's I can see it on my screen at least, but if anyone is having issues seeing it, again, this will be available to download at the napcom.org website after this concludes.
If I could say a quick thing, usually on the landlord side, they're too friendly, expecting reciprocal, pay the rent, move out quickly, whatever the tenant claims they'll do. The tenant doesn't do it. Owner is afraid to be a bit adversarial and start terminate a tenancy, serve a notice that ups the ante. So owners go months, and then they say, screw it. This person isn't doing what I thought. Now I got to be tough to them. That's the start of a very adversarial process. The stage 2 is to ease into starting an eviction, but be very open to negotiation. So people go from stage 1 to stage 3. Helping owners use stage 2 successfully is very tough work, because people are conflict avoiders. They think if they're nice, people will do what they say they'll do. Owners avoid conflict. So that's what this is about. We have in this book, a lot of detail of how to negotiate from the owner perspective. So showing owners how to do that, they'll pay you. I get regularly requested to be paid by owners through PayPal, because they can't afford lawyers. They want the basics of how to move through an eviction process, negotiating throughout to, avoid a judgment, but still, meet their needs as a landlord. Other questions?
We had a question from Dacia. She asked that phone mediation can be problematic and that some people may be coached in the background. She's wondering if you've ever experienced this.
I'm sorry, that funding mediation is difficult because people are coached in the background?
Phone mediation's telephone?
Phone. Oh, I got it. Because the party is agency. You're saying that you're talking to somebody, but they may have somebody sort of talking them out of what they're discussing with you on the phone?
Yes, it sounds like perhaps parties that were not initially part of this mediation in the background giving their input or advice over the phone.
Yeah, I mean, we have that. I don't think it's any different doing phone work than sitting in the room with people. I mean, we know that all the moments when we've done all this great work and the parties are close to settlement and we, really pleased that they've worked so hard. And then the last moment is that, well, I got to tell my wife about this, or, I got to talk to my associate or whatever. The phone work gives people sort of, a comfortable, non-committed, freely offered, if, depending upon the funding source, way to think through a conflict in multiple ways, not just how to go to court, but what I can do today, paper trail, letters, collateral work to give tenants, information about a resource to pay the back rent. I generally get a lot of positive feedback because I'm putting very few demands on them, and it's before trial, and then and it's a trust building process. So that has not been a big issue on for me. There was a
Great,
couple
thank you. And yes, we had one from Mandy. She's wondering what your experience is with larger corporate landlords in mediation, especially when they're evicting multiple residencies at a time. It isn't unusual for their courts to see a landlord evicting multiple households in one day, and she's wondering what is their incentive to negotiate.
Right. I mean, if you get these large move-outs, clear-outs, and they're quite prevalent here. Owner buys a 10-unit building and suddenly gives every tenant, move-out notices or 200% rent increase notices. And what we have a very, very healthy organizing community here in Boston and other parts of the state. City Life Viva Urbana has unbelievably successfully used protest and mass rent withholding and media visibility to deter. I have been a mediator when the lawyer and the owner, the corporate lawyer and the corporate owner and the lawyer, and then the representatives of the tenants come together to talk about across the board percentage rent increases. Or, that's often what the tenants want to talk about. They don't want to talk about move-outs or length of time before tenants all have to move out. This is not the easiest model that I've described for getting a large owner up front to start talking to me. They want to be in much better legal position. They want to not have, they want to wait till they need to talk to the tenants. Organizing is a much better, initial power balancing technique to get owners to the table when they are, wanting to kick low, moderate income people out who've been there for 20 years, all of it, which we know is happening across this country. And I don't think if you're doing good work with the small owners, you'll get called for the large cases, but this is not where I would put one's time and resources to, because I work for the city of Boston, I get asked to do these cases, but that's not what they want me to do. They know, both sides have lawyers and the organizing is in the background. And, often for those cases, I can't be that value added because the lawyers can shape the issues and talk about alternatives. And it's not where I put my time and energy as much. Is that helpful?
Yes, and she had an update to that. She's stating that these evictions are for rent defaults, not a takeover with rent increases.
Well, when you say rent defaults, non-payments, right? Is that what she's saying? I mean, defaults mean the tenant doesn't appear in court. Can she clarify, please?
Clarified, yes, that is correct.
Yes means for non-payment or for no shows. I mean, if for non-payment, yeah, I mean, it's tough. And if owners are not legally stable, they've made mistakes of many sorts, not fixing, not handling security deposits, getting in without permission to fix. Those are critical defenses and counterclaims that tenants need to access to either delay the eviction or offset rent owed. We have a Consumer Protection Act 93A. But at the end of the day, on non-payments, it'd be non-payment different than rent increases. I mean, for non-payment, for people at risk, fortunately in Massachusetts, there's a lot of money to stop perhaps 25% of those cases. And that's where some programs I think can do a lot more. Just to be able to access all the available resources in your state. It could be just church volunteer contributions to a church or wherever it is. This is not magic here. It's we have an income gap and a housing rent burden gap. Percentage of your income paying to rent is so high across the country. We're trying to knock off as many as we can, but we lose a lot of people who lose jobs or but there is a lot one can do with owners with whom you build a relationship and build trust. They understand you're helping them, you're keeping their costs down, you know what they can do with, we win goodwill. And often we get an owner with a non-payment case to agree to take 60 cents on the dollar and go 4 months out. So the tenant isn't facing eviction in 2 weeks. They're facing eviction in 4 months. Buys them some time. If we can get a stay of execution for 2-3 months without any rent payment owed, that gives the tenant. Judges will do that sometimes to literally cost the landlord a couple months more of rent, and then give the landlord, right to evict. Anyway, I know we're over time, but no magic bullets, but we on the edges we can help. Other questions?
And yes, we have one from Beth. She's asking if Massachusetts is a just cause state. In other words, does the law require landlords to have a just cause to not renew a lease to honor leases on properties purchased?
Right. I mean, a big subject. As I said, until 1994, we were a just cause state. We called rent control, and I worked on those disputes from 1989 to 1994. Over 4 efforts have been pursued without success to restore Massachusetts. This year, there's a Metro Mayors Coalition is going to file statewide legislation. No is the answer. We are not a just cause eviction state, but it's a highly active debate. And I think this year, the tenant groups are better organized than they've ever been. It's obviously controversial, big subject. That would, obviously make a difference. But it changes the calculus between the parties dramatically.
And I'm not seeing any more. I'm not seeing any more at the moment. But if there's any burning last-minute questions, feel free to enter those now. Maybe give it a minute or so, and since we're already 14 minutes over, we can probably go ahead and call it fairly soon. If you're ready, Peter.
I'm here if anybody has questions.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining us today, everyone, and a big thanks to Peter for carving out a chunk of your day to be able to share all this wisdom and expertise with everyone. Again, the recording for this as well as the slides will be made available at napcom.org. So check on that in the near future for any of that. And thank you again, Peter, for coming in and sharing all this with us. Any last words for the audience, Peter?
Thank you very much. I would love to hear any successes on the housing front, and if I could be of more help in the future, I can be reached. My contact information is on the PowerPoint. I really appreciate the incredible work that all of you have done for the field of mediation. It's dear to my heart, and I'm so happy to know that so much is going on across the country. So thank you. Thank you so much for the chance to talk with you. I appreciate that.
Great. Thank you, Peter, again, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day.